Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peace Islands New York event. We're very happy to have with us Rabbi Dr. Kronish. He'll be talking about his new book, Profiles in Peace, Voices of Peacebuilders in the Midst of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. You have the synopsis both below this video that's streaming currently. So please review both the synopsis and the details of the rabbi's biography. I welcome Rabbi Ron. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, 1 second.
The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing what I was doing. Okay, I'm happy to be with you, and I would. The first thing I tried to share a second ago was the cover of my book. I'm going to put it up again so I can, wait a second, that didn't work, but one more time. There it is, I hope. Screen sharing. Okay, so I've lived in Israel for 43 years now, and for 25 of those years, I worked as the director of the Interreligious Coordinating Council in Israel, where I did interreligious dialogue for peace. When I retired 7 years ago, I published a book of essays on coexistence and reconciliation of many of my colleagues in Israel. And a few years later, I published my memoir on peace building called Profiles in Peace, called The Other Peace Process. And in the last few years, I sat down and wrote a new book called Profiles in Peace, Voices of Peacebuilders in the Midst of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. So I want to say a few words about who are the peacebuilders and who are the peacemakers. Okay, so I've divided the peace work into two categories. One is the peacemakers, is the term people in conflict resolution use for the politicians, international relations people, diplomats, people who make peace agreements between governments. As you probably know, we have some history in the Middle East and between Israeli and the Arab countries of some peace agreements. When I moved to Israel in 1979, it was 3 months after the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, signed by Menachem Begin and from Israel, Anwar Sadat of Egypt, and President Jimmy Carter, a very famous photo op, iconic photo that many of you will remember. So I came at a time when peace was in the air. But the real developments in peacemaking began whoops, look out. I don't want that. I don't want that. No. Excuse me. Go away. Okay, I can't stop it. The real developments in peacemaking took place in the 1990s. And here I'm going to try to call up something that's going to help me. Just give me a second and I'll get it. Profile. 1 second. Desktop. There it is. Okay. Here we go. Can everybody see that? Is it on the screen? I hope so. Okay. So I'm going to give you a quick summary of what's called the peace process between the Israeli government and the Palestinian.
We're not seeing that on the screen, Rabbi
Okay.
Ron.
All right, I'll try it again. 1 second. I don't know what happened. Try it again. You don't see it yet? I thought I did share screen. 1 second. Try one more time. I'm not the best in this. I thought I had it earlier today. I'm getting other things. 1 second. You don't see. 1 minute. 1 minute. What happened? Did I lose it? What? You don't see anything?
No, we saw the book cover for a while, but that's gone.
1 second. Share screen. Here we go. One more time. Stop.
Yes, now
share.
something's coming,
Okay. Now we're going to
but
try.
it's gone
one more.
again.
I'll see you. 1 second. There it is. You see it now?
Yes, now we do.
All right.
Period of normalization.
That's
Thank you.
good. Okay, thank you. Sorry for that technical blip. These things happen for some of us who are not good Zoomers. So I'm going to give you a quick history of the peace process, the ups and downs. For those of you who don't know it well, in 1991, a conference was convened in Madrid. It was the Bush government in America. We had a right-wing government in Israel led by Yitzhak Shamir, and he decided to go to an international conference in Madrid, where for the first time Palestinians would be there. They came as part of the Jordanian delegation, and it was the first time that Israelis and Palestinians entered into negotiations. The next major milestone was in September 13th, 1993, when the first Oslo Accord was signed on the White House lawn. Many of you remember the photo of Prime Minister Rabin and Foreign Minister Peres. Prime Minister Rabin shook hands with Yasser Arafat, and President Clinton was the master of ceremonies. That event was preceded by 10 months of secret negotiations between representatives of the Israel government and representatives of the PLO, and they met in and around Oslo in the guise of academic conferences, and secretly they did a lot of dialoguing, not negotiating, sitting around, drinking coffee, getting to know one another, learning to trust one another. And at the end of that period, they developed what they call the Declaration of Principles, which is what they signed in Washington as the first Oslo Accord. It was a 5-year agreement and meant to, during those 5 years, the sides were to negotiate all kinds of issues in the final comprehensive peace, which, as you may know, did not happen. Following Oslo, we had an amazing event at the end of 1993, only a few months later, of a diplomatic agreement between Israel and the Vatican, the fundamental agreement between the Holy See and the State of Israel, which was an important event for Israel. And in 93 and 94, we had more Oslo peace agreements. October 1994, we signed a second agreement with an Arab state. We had an old one with Egypt. Now we had peace accords with the Palestinians. And suddenly we have a peace agreement with Jordan. King Hussein meets with Yasser Arafat and Clinton and Rabin in the Arava Desert on the border between Jordan and Israel. And they signed this great agreement with Jordan. Jordan is the country with the longest border of Israel, from Aqaba and Eilat in the south all the way up to Syria in the north, overlooking the Sea of Galilee. So it was an important agreement, which, like the peace agreement with Egypt, has been enforced till this very day, despite all the problems that have arisen. So if you were me back in 1994, after the peace agreement with Jordan, you were pretty happy. It was an amazing time. You thought that the days of the Messiah were at hand, and that peace was being made between Israel and Palestine, and between Israel and Jordan, and Israel and the Vatican. It was a great time. But then all of a sudden, 1995, November 4th, the Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist, Yigal Amir, who's in jail for the rest of his life. And some people say that actually was the death blow of the political peace process. I don't agree. I think it was severely wounded, but the fact of the matter is that it did go on. And under Clinton, there were 2 more attempts to make peace. One was in 1998. By then, the prime minister was Benjamin Netanyahu. You've heard of him. And he was elected in 96. And he had, in 92 and 3, he was against the Oslo Accords. But when he became prime minister in 96, he said, I'm for the two-state solution, and I'll go along with the American government. And he comes to Washington in 1998, October, and under Clinton and with Arafat, you can see him shaking hands. Netanyahu shook hands with Arafat, and they signed another peace agreement known as the Wye River Memorandum in October 23, because it took place at a place called Wye River Plantation, just outside of Washington, D.C. Not too much new in that agreement, but it was another milestone where the Israelis and the Palestinians were on the road towards peace, or so it seemed. I like to tell that story because you see this pen? It's not this exact pen, but Mr. Netanyahu did use a pen once to sign an agreement with the Palestinians at Wye River. So if he found the pen, he could probably do it again. You know, where there's a will, there's a way. He knows how to use a pen, or he did once. And one more event happened as we were climbing the mountain of peace in the 90s. Clinton, in his last year, convened the parties to come to Camp David in the Maryland Hills, and they called it Camp David II Summit. The first one was in 1978, Carter, Begin, and Sadat. This one is Prime Minister Barack, Clinton, and Arafat and their teams of advisors. And they spent 2 full weeks. President Clinton really wanted it to happen. He wanted his legacy to be peace in the Middle East, and they were very close, according to lots of people. But in the end, it didn't work, and there was no peace agreement. Why didn't it work? Well, the Palestinians blamed the Israelis for being stubborn, and guess what? The Israelis blamed the Palestinians for being stubborn. Each side blamed the other, and since then, we have many years of what I call the blame game. If your side had been more flexible, we could have had peace, but, you know, we did the best we could. Okay, so then, let's see now. So after the failure of Camp David II, we go downhill. You can see the arrow going downhill down the mountain, tumbling down. In 2000, after a Knesset member named Ariel Sharon took a little stroll on Temple Mount, Haram el-Sharif, the second Intifada, the uprising of the Palestinians, broke out. Compared to the one in 87, this was more violent and more long-lasting. It went on for 5 years. Suicide bombers, counter-terror, violence, closures. It was a very dark and difficult period. And in the middle of that period, 2002, by then we had Prime Minister Sharon. People came to him and said, "We have too many terrorist incursions. What can you do?" And he called in some of his advisors, and they decided to build what they call a security fence, or the Palestinians call it a separation wall. It's the same thing. And they built it from 2002 to 2006, and it's still there. When they originally built it, I went on a tour with some of the designers of this fence. They told me then it was 96% fence and 4% wall, and its goal was security. And one person said, "Well, when we make peace, we'll take it down." And guess what? It's still standing. So that gives you an indication. Then under 2000 and 2005, Prime Minister Sharon had a clever idea, a peace idea, supposedly, and he decided to unilaterally disengage from Gaza, take all of these Israeli soldiers, thousands of soldiers, 9 or 10,000 settlers, and pull them all out and back to Israel, with the hopes that something good would go on in Gaza. But you all know what happened. A little afterwards, there was a mini civil war, and the Hamas defeated the PLO, the Fatah. And since 2007, 2008, the Hamas has been reigning in Gaza. And there you can see the rest of the downhill slope. Gaza War 1 in 2008, Gaza War 3 in 2012, 2 in 2012, the Kerry mediation under Obama. There was an attempt for 9 months of the American government to try to get the people back to the table. It did not succeed. Then another Gaza war, and in May 2021, another Gaza war, and recently a 3-day war. So we've had a lot of violence between Hamas, the Palestinians of Hamas, and the government of Israel in the recent years since 2008. And if I were to update this chart today, I would say, where is the political peace process? Well, if you have a good freezer in your Frigidaire, it's deep in the deep freeze of the Frigidaire. To put it mildly, there is virtually no peace process in Israel at the moment. Now, I have to get out of this slide. How am I going to do that? Let's try that. No, screen sharing is shop. Okay, there I am. Okay, am I back? All right. So I gave you that quick history, which is actually chapter 1 of my book with a timeline, to tell you that the political peace process people have basically failed us. And we're in a situation, I call it political despair, where on both sides, neither one sees that their political leaders have a roadmap to a peace plan anymore. And therefore, I argue that the only people actually doing peace in Israel and Palestine nowadays are what I call the peace builders. And that's what my book is about. Who are the peace builders? Peace builders are rabbis, imams, Christian clergy, educators, youth workers, social workers, psychologists, all kinds of individuals and groups, NGOs in civil society, in both societies and beyond, who are working to create peaceful relations between people, not between governments. So it's largely the work of people and NGOs, in our case, with the absence of government support and often with resistance from the governments who prefer the status quo, oddly enough, than any steps towards peace. So I believe that the peace builders are doing great work in Israel. And I decided to write about 6 of them. I could have written about 60 if I wanted, or 15 or 100, but I decided to do 6 in-depth portraits of people that I've come to know and meet and regard as significant peace builders in Israel and Palestine. And if you want to know about all 6, you have to read the book. But if you want to know about a few of them, I'm going to tell you right now about a couple of them. Okay. Share screening is stopped. Okay, can you give me, why am I not able to share the screen share? Okay, well, that's my family. You see, you don't want to see my family. Hold on. Desktop. Okay. All right, I would like to introduce you now to Rabbi Michael Melchior. You all see him? See him on the screen? Oh, no, not that. Okay, we'll leave that. Here's Rabbi Melchior with the tie and jacket and the beard and the black kippah. Rabbi Melchior is the leading Orthodox Jewish peace builder in Israel.
Rabbi Ron, could you enlarge that? Okay.
I'm going to try. What I do wrong now? I'm having a little trouble here.
Yep, and you can enlarge that from there. There you go.
I go.
Just
okay.
So thank you.
Rabbi Melchior is down on the left. He is an Orthodox rabbi who is unique among Orthodox rabbis in Israel in that he's a pro-peace based on Judaism rabbi. He came from Denmark, where he was the son of the chief rabbi of Denmark, one of his sons now is the chief rabbi of Denmark. He moved to Israel as a young man, got married there, started a family, and was involved in religious peace movements at a young age. Then he went back and served as chief rabbi of Norway for many years. And ultimately, he settled in Israel, where he became rabbi of a synagogue in my neighborhood, and became a politician for a few years, where he was elected on behalf of a new party called Meimad, a religious peace party, that joined the government of Ehud Barak in 1999, and until 2001 was active in the negotiations at Camp David in 2000 and in other negotiations during those years. After he left the parliament, he became involved in the work of NGOs, and he set up a number of NGOs, 5 of them. And for me, the one that's significant for our discussion, it's called Mosaica. And within Mosaica, he is the leader of what's called the Religious Peace Initiative. This is an effort by religious leaders in Israel. That means Orthodox rabbis, hardcore, to get to know hardcore Islamic leaders. The real work is with the Muslims, less with the Christians, but he works also with Christians, and he's trying to show how both Islam and Judaism can support peace. He was critical of the Oslo Accord architects who were secular intellectuals and left out the religious communities. And he believes that if we get more religious communities involved, we can have more of a chance to create grassroots support of peace processes. He has been active to this day in engaging in discussions and mediation and cooperative projects with all kinds of Muslim leaders in Israel and Palestine and beyond in the Muslim world. And as far as I can see, he is the leading interreligious peace builder in Israel, who is dedicated to this for many years and will continuing right now as we speak, and will be at it for, God willing, many years to come. I want to say a few words about now a Palestinian colleague. This one on the bottom right, with the white hair and the shirt without a tie, Professor Mohammed Dajani. Some of you may know the name, the Dajani name. It's a famous Palestinian family going back hundreds of years in Palestine. Among other things, they hold the keys to the King David's tomb and to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They've lived in Jerusalem for a long, long time, and he is part of that family. He grew up in Jerusalem. As a young man, he moved to Lebanon, where he was active in Fatah, the movement of the PLO at that time. But after a few years, he was critical of what they were doing. He moved to Jordan, and after Jordan, he moved to the United States. In the United States, he spent 9 or 10 years studying. He got one doctorate in government at South Carolina, another one at the University of Texas. And then he goes back to Jordan again, where he helped work for NGOs in Jordan. And then all of a sudden in 1995, as you can recall, this is a few years after the Oslo process, and he decides to come back to Palestine, to Jerusalem, because his father was ill. And when he gets a permit to come into Israel, he and his father his father was ill, so they went to a Jewish hospital, Israeli hospital, Hadassah Hospital in West Jerusalem. And he was amazed to discover how well the Israeli doctors, in cooperation with Palestinian doctors, took excellent care of his father. This was a shock to his system because he had always seen Israelis as the enemy. And this event humanized him and helped turn him into a different person. Not too long afterwards, he had another incident, this time with his mother, and they went on a visit to Tel Aviv one day, and his mother, who was asthmatic, forgot her inhaler, and she was having an asthma attack, and they were near the airport. They stopped at a checkpoint, and they were stopped by soldiers at a checkpoint near the airport, and they said, well, our mother is having an asthma attack, and we don't know what to do. And they said, we'll take you to the nearest military hospital a few minutes away. And they did. And they took great care of his mother, who didn't make it in the end. She died the next day. But again, he was shocked to see soldiers who were so humanistic and caring and trying to take care of his mother. So these two incidents helped transform his life, and he became, from then on, a peace builder. Professor Dudani established a NGO called Wasatiyah, called the Middle Way, Arabic for the Middle Way. He has taught for many years at Al-Quds University, where he taught not only American studies, but he taught about Islam and reconciliation and peace. And he has preached and taught his philosophy for many years in Palestine, in many international forums. And to this day, despite challenges and despite personal difficulties and threats on him, he continues to be an important Muslim, moderate peace builder in Israel and Palestine. And therefore, he's one of the 6 people that I decided to feature in this book. Now, I could go on and talk to you about the other heroes of my book, but then nobody will buy the book. And it's like telling the end of the movie, so I can't do that. But I will raise one question for you that I raised towards the end of my book. And the question that comes up a lot, and I've been asked this many times over the years, is peace still possible? Is there any chance, even with the current new elections in Israel and the government that's likely to be formed, which will be a very right-wing government, is there any chance that somehow peace can be made? And before I answer that, I'd like to go back a little bit in history to refresh our memories. So I already mentioned that in 1977, President Anwar Sadat decided to visit Israel. He came to the Knesset and he made a great speech, and he urged reconciliation. For those of you who know the history, this came only a few years after the famous October 1973 war, where Egypt and Syria launched surprise attacks. Israel counter-launched and eventually won the war, but it was a shock to the system. And previous to that was the 6-Day War, where Egypt was defeated. And then we had the 56 war and the 48 war, and many wars between Egypt and Israel for many years. So had you asked anybody in Israel, or probably in Egypt, was there any chance in 1977, 78, 79 that peace could be made between Egypt and Israel? What's the answer? No chance. Nobody had it in the cards. Nobody imagined the war process ever ending between Egypt and Israel. But we know from history that it happened. And we've had more than 40 years since 79. That's already 43 years of no armed conflicts between Egypt and Israel. Quite amazing. And not only that, Egypt intervenes to try to stop the Gaza wars all the time. So it's an amazing success story that was certainly not predictable in its time. Okay, let's go forward. We talked a few minutes ago about the Oslo Accords. Yitzhak Rabin Grew up as a military man. He spent all his years, decades fighting wars, commander of the 1967 war as a military man, a hardliner, right? When he was elected, nobody imagined he was really going to go for a peace agreement. And he was convinced by some of his colleagues, Shimon Peres, Yossi Beilin, who were in the government, to try out this back channel called the Oslo process. And he did it. And then he shook hands with Yasser Arafat and made peace, what they call the peace of the brave. If you had asked me, I was living in Israel a month before, was there any chance that Yitzhak Rabin, the soldier, was going to shake hands with arch terrorist Yasser Arafat? I'd say, not going to happen, right? So I could go on and on with these examples. I could give you examples from other places. How many people thought that Nelson Mandela was going to emerge from jail and reconcile with de Klerk? Who thought that was going to happen? Nobody. So history shows us that the peace processes are full of surprises. Lots of things happen that we don't know about, back channels, secrets, people working on peace that we don't know about. And very often we've had right-wing governments making peace. Nixon went to China, remember? And all kinds of things. Menachem Begin, right? He made peace with Sadat. So I don't accept the doctrine that right-wing governments can never make peace. Things can happen. International pressure can happen. It depends who's elected president or prime minister in certain other countries, like the United States, in 2 years, right? So all kinds of things can happen that we don't know about and we don't expect right now. So if you ask me, is peace between Israel and the Palestinians in the cards? I'd say, well, probably not tomorrow or next month or even next year, but who knows that what can happen as we go down the road. And so I still believe that we can get a peace agreement one day, I hope. But I also often say that even if we get another piece of paper, another peace agreement, the peace builders will have a lot of work to do in the years ahead, because they're the ones who help the people learn to live in peace together. It's kind of like the peacemakers design the house, but they don't put in any furniture and there's no kitchen. The peace builders put in the furniture in the kitchen so we can eat together, so we can sit in the living room together, so we can get to know one another, so we can change our schools, change what the media writes about each other. There will be a lot of things that the peace builders have to do, and it will take a long time. So some of you may know about the new conflict in Northern Ireland, which was resolved in 1998 by Senator George Mitchell. They made an agreement called the Good Friday Agreement, right? Since then, nothing's happened. And there have been little things, but the agreement has worked. And there are lots and lots of NGOs and organizations and people, and there has been lots of funding by the governments and by international organizations to help the peace builders in Northern Ireland get on with life and not just, quarrel all the time. So it's happened in other places, and therefore I believe there's no reason at some point in time it can't happen in Israel. Since I mentioned Senator Mitchell, I'll tell you one story about him. Several years ago, I was visiting New York one day, and I was invited to speak at a famous Episcopal church called St. Bart's, 50th and Park Avenue, opposite the Waldorf Astoria. And I met the rector beforehand, and he invited me on a Sunday morning to give to be interviewed in the rector's forum in after Sunday morning worship. I arrived a few minutes early, and he's standing in the back of the church talking to some of his congregants, and one of them, who he was talking to, was a fellow named Senator George Mitchell. And he introduces me to Senator Mitchell. I said, I'm honored to meet you. And very quick conversation. And the next thing I know, when we go into the room where the interview was being held, there's Senator Mitchell sitting near the back. So I was talking about some of the problems I've told you now, about political despair, about how many people have lost hope for peace. And Senator Mitchell raised his hand and he said, I'd like to make a comment. And the rector said, okay, go ahead, make a comment, tell us something. So he told us the following story. He said, I went to Ireland on my last week of negotiations and arrived in Dublin or Belfast, I'm not sure I remember which one. And he opens the morning newspaper on Monday morning and he finds the latest poll. The latest poll said 84% of Catholics and 84% of Protestants told the pollsters, we will never have a peace agreement around here. There's too much hatred, too much animosity, too much fear, too much mistrust. It can't happen here. 4 days later, on Good Friday, he sealed the agreement and everybody signed. And pretty much everybody's behaved themselves since then. So I like to repeat the story George Mitchell told me. By the way, I found it in one of his books that I purchased later. So he's written the story down as well. I think it's a great story because it tells us never to give up on peace, even though it seems very, very difficult and almost impossible, because you never know what's going to happen, when people are going to get tired of killing each other, which leaders are going to come about that year, or whether the grassroots is going to rise up and say, we've had enough of killing. Many different factors. And he saw it happen in his own life as a politician and a diplomat, and of course, a great leader of the Democratic Party in America. So is peace possible? I hope so. And in any event, I don't give up on the possibility that it might come. One person once asked me, do you think it'll come in your lifetime? And I said, yes. And then he said, how long do you plan to live? Anyway, so I think it's possible. And I think we need it. That is to say, we need it for our own health of both societies. In the meantime, the peacebuilders will continue their work, because the work of the peacebuilders is the changing the hearts and minds of the people to see the benefits of learning to live in peace rather than war. That's a spiritual, educational challenge. You don't get elected for it. And you might work at it for 4 years, or you might work at it for 40 years. So some of the people in my book have worked at it for 40 years. I think we need to keep this hope for peace alive. And the peace builders on the ground are the ones who are doing it. I've talked enough. I've gone my 40 minutes as assigned. And now I'm open if, Emery, if you or anybody else wants to ask me a question. Wait, I don't hear you.
Yes, I was on mute. Thank you, Rabbi Ron. And again, thank you to everyone that has joined us. As a reminder, please type your questions in the chat box to the right. I will relay some of them as best as we can in the next few minutes. And of course, we've shared, it's also below the video, but it's also been shared in the chat box, a link to Rabbi Ron's book on Amazon. So by all means, beyond what he's spoken about, this is quite an executive summary. By all means, take a look, if you will, via that link that is again both in the chat box and in the synopsis. If I may take moderator's privilege, Rabbi Ron, in that by asking the first question or two. And again, let me remind everyone to type your questions in. Join the dialogue. Be part of this engaging conversation with Rabbi Ram. Now, where Americans, a large proportion of our participants and audience members are American. America and Israel have a very special and strong relationship. Of course, it ebbs based on administration and various issues, but by and large, it's very strong relationship. There's a great deal of support between both America and Israel. What kind of role beyond the grassroots efforts that you speak of these Israelis and Arabs, different backgrounds of Christian and Muslim background, Jewish background, what role can Americans play? Is there a role for the average American beyond what the White House and State Department and the official things and administrations come and go? But as you've mentioned, some of your peace builders have been at it for 40 years. There's not too many heads of state, not too many bureaucrats that last that long. But the average person with a passion can. Is there recommendations from your engagement with Israelis and Arabs and others? Are there lessons for what Americans can do to play a part? Can they play a part?
Yes.
Is distance an issue? Are there efforts they can do, they can perform in regards to members of Congress? Or what are the roles, if you can, a top 5 or a top 3, on the ground types of activities that Americans can do to play a part?
Okay, thank you for that question. I will respond. First of all, I think there are a number of levels where Americans can be involved. One certainly is political lobbying. And I think one can be pro-peace, pro-Israeli, and pro-Palestinian at the same time. And I think that's important, not to, as it were, take sides, but if you're pro-peace, you want the Israelis and the Palestinians to both benefit from peace. So there are various ways to lobby. One of my favorites is an organization in Washington called J Street, which is, in the last several years, a pro-peace and pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian organization. They're actually having an annual conference at the beginning of December, and they do great work. But there are many other ways one can lobby and speak out to your congressmen and senators to urge the American government to continue to try to act as a neutral broker in the peace process and not just to avoid it because it's too difficult. The second level is to support many of the NGOs that are active. And there's you can find a list on a website called the Alliance for Middle East Peace of 160 different organizations, big and small and middle size. Some work in health, some work in education, some work in advocacy, and choose the one you like. Some are Israeli and Palestinian partnerships, some are Arab-Jewish partnerships in Israel. There are many NGOs doing very good work, and they need financial support. And the third thing I would suggest is, and this is kind of why I've written my book and why I'm having this conversation and why I'm doing many Zoom links. This is my 5th Zoom book talk this week. And why I'm trying to get the word out. Most people don't know the stories of peace builders. They only know the first part of my lecture, the failures of the peace process. And that only makes people unhappy and say, oh, what's wrong with them? And then they'll tend to blame one side or the other side, which is wrong, because both sides are at fault. So I think one thing you can do is spread the stories. Let people know of all these wonderful people doing peace work on the ground, despite all the challenges and difficulties. They're at it every day and trying to enlarge the grassroots interest in peace. And if you look at that list of organizations, you'll see many amazing organizations like Women Wage Peace. It's the largest peace movement in Israel since 2014. It's Jewish women who've reached out to Palestinian women inside Israel and across the border, and they're doing amazing things. Okay, the Abraham Fund initiatives, the Brave Family Forum, Combatants for Peace, which Galia Golan, one of the heroines of my book, is involved in. There are many good projects that one can be involved with. One can help spread the word about them, write about them on your Facebook page, send information about them to your friends and e-lists and whatever social media you do. Get the word out that these peace activists on both sides are there doing good work. One of the reasons I tell you this is I have a great memory that many years ago I was at an international conference in a European city, and I was talking about what these groups were doing then, and a man stood up and he decided to make a comment. He was the Archbishop of Mozambique, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "You know, you're the first person I ever met or heard that talked about anybody in Israel doing work for peace. I didn't know about this. I didn't know it existed." And I was shocked. So it means most people don't read this, not in your newspapers. You don't see it on TV. What you see is who killed who and how many, who had the latest scandal and how bad. But this doesn't, get the A story, and often doesn't even get the human interest story. So get the story out. And that's why I'm happy to cooperate with the Peace Islands Institutes. And I see the work you do in the forums you hold is to get the word out about some of the important people and organizations doing work for peace in Israel and Palestine and other places.
Thank you, Rabbi Ron. We have a few questions, but let me ask one more before I pass those other questions from the chat to you. Now, we've seen rapprochement between Israel and some Arab states. What are your thoughts on this in regards to developments between Israel and some of the Gulf states and other states in Africa?
So I'll give you my candid evaluation of what's called the Abraham Accords, which were done by the previous American administration. I don't think they had much to do with peace. They more business deals. So you can fly to Dubai, and a lot of businessmen are flying to Dubai. You can go to Abu Dhabi now. Tourism is good. But these Arab countries, Bahrain, United Emirates, and Morocco, like many Arab countries in the past, gave lip service to helping the Palestinians, but in practice are not doing anything. So it's an end run on the peace process. Sounds good because you can, label it a peace process, but it's a way to avoid dealing with the core issue, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, with that said, there may be one good thing to it, which is beyond my scope, but I'll mention it anyway. In part, it's a geopolitical move to get so-called moderate Arab countries with Israel in a coalition against you-know-who, the Iranians. So you can hear talk all the time, well, next online is Saudi Arabia. Next online is Turkey, and you probably heard that Israel and Turkey have reconciled now. So it has to do not with peace, but with something else, which is gearing up for confrontation or something with Iran. So maybe that's positive. I don't know. It's maybe it is. But in terms of the resolving our local conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, it didn't contribute anything and probably won't. Sorry to be so direct about that, but that's my view.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Ron. Now we've got 2 questions, and that's enough time I think we should have enough time before we finish up today. Let me get those questions to you. First one here is, who would have to sign a peace agreement these days? It's being asked by somebody called Bremer Police. Who would have to sign a peace agreement these days?
Well, first of all, it's not likely to happen these days, but in principle, who would have to sign it is the head of the Palestinian Authority. That's Mr. Abbas. And whoever becomes the prime minister of Israel, which apparently will be Mr. Netanyahu. Remember, he did it once, so he has to find that pen from '98. I don't say it's terribly likely, but who knows? He didn't think Nixon would go to China either. But the heads of the government, and they would have to have help from the King of Jordan, who would have to support it, the Egyptian people, they're always standing in the background, smiling and say, yes, it's a good idea. Maybe the head of Turkey, maybe the head of Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the others would give it some support. Certainly the American government would probably be the broker of the peace agreement. All the Europeans would support it. But the actual signature would be by the leaders who would have to take responsibility for their people. Okay. Yes. What else? One more. I don't hear you. Unmute.
Yes. Perennial Zoom problem of unmuting. Thank you. And we have this question from an Honor Stevens. Thank you for the great talk. What are the three main external factors which can facilitate peacemakers' work in Israel and other parts of the world?
Okay, so I need to again clarify if we're talking about the peacemakers or the peace builders. The person who asked the question used peacemakers, so I assumed that he meant by that, or he or she, the political side. Okay, so what are the three main factors that we need? The first factor is the will to do it. The decision that you've really got to enter into negotiations and reach compromises in order to get the job done. The second thing you need in order to get there is building trust between the parties, because you don't want to make an agreement and then it falls apart, the next year. So you have to work on building trust. Building trust is often done by dialogue, not by negotiations. Negotiations is the work of the lawyers. It's hard-nosed stuff. You give me this and I give you that. Dialogue is getting to know people, what they really think and where they're really coming from and what they really want. So one has to enter into serious dialogue in order to build trust between the parties, because you want to make it last. And the third thing I would say is, ultimately, the peacemakers and the peace builders have to work together. You can't have one without the other, right? Because you need the political arrangements, you need to build the house, remember? And you need to furnish it with the kitchen and the furniture. So you need both. And you want to have good food, right? And you want to have people happy. And so you need people who are going to work on not only the political solutions. One of the surprising things I've discovered, particularly meeting with Americans who come to Israel, is they think everything's about politics. What a silly idea. Not everything's about politics. Politics create frameworks, but in American society, you have hundreds, thousands of organizations which work on getting people to learn to live together and ending hatred and bigotry. That's not done by the politicians. So we need the political work and we need the work on the ground of civil society. Both together should come together, and they need a vision and a long-term focus. This is not like we made a peace process just for 1 year to make the Americans happy. But we did it for ourselves and our children and our grandchildren. So, we want to have that 40-year look forward. So we're thrilled that the peace with Egypt has lasted 40 years. The peace with Jordan is almost 30 years. And so you got to have a vision of where you're going. And even though a peace may be cold sometimes, one can work on, making it less cold and creating more opportunities and encounters. So there's a lot of work to be done on both sides of the aisle, on the politicians and the peace builders together. The more they cooperate in the long run, the better chance we'll have of learning, not just having a peace agreement, a piece of paper, but learning to live together in peace, as has happened in other countries. And that's the story I like to tell. Some conflicts do end. It is not divinely ordained that this conflict will go on forever, right? Other conflicts have ended in various ways. This one can end too, if people have the will.
On that note, thank you very much, Rabbi Ron. Again, a reminder for those that are new here, please subscribe to our channel. That's the usual thing we're reminded of on YouTube. So please subscribe. You should see a subscribe button below the screen there. And of course, to make sure our videos get to a wider audience, please like. Again, the standard phrase is like and subscribe. So please do that. You have a link to the book both in the synopsis and in the chat. Please review the book on Amazon. And we look forward to hosting our participants again at future events. By all means, visit our channel and see some of our other videos regarding various issues, particularly here in the United States and specifically in New York area. We're dedicated to engaging with people of different culture and faith backgrounds in New York, both in Manhattan and broader New York. So this is just a polite reminder. This video will be available within the next few hours. So by all means, if you've enjoyed this video, share this with your networks. So I want to thank you again, Rabbi Ron.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
And until next time, everyone, enjoy the rest of the day. And it's goodbye from us here at Peace Islands New York. Have a lovely rest of the day.